In the year 1924, sociologists they were absolutely terrified. I mean, they were looking at the rapid adoption of this brand new piece of technology, and they were warning everyone that it was going to isolate us forever.
Oh, yeah. The panic was real.
Right. Like, they predicted people would just stop talking to their neighbors, they'd stop gathering in the public square, and instead, they'd just sit alone in their parlors, you know, in the dark, consuming entertainment in total social isolation.
Completely cut off from the world.
Exactly. But the technology they were so terrified of, it wasn't the smartphone, it wasn't social media or the internet, it was the radio.
Which is, it is one of the great historical ironies of modern sociology, right?
It really is.
The very medium that sparked that first massive panic about the death of the local community is now being re-examined nearly a century later as a potential cure.
And that brings us perfectly to our starting point today, because we were looking at a comment left recently by a listener on a broadcast of a vintage 1948 radio play. And tucked away beneath, terabytes of resurrected audio files, this listener wrote a single sentence that just completely subverts that century-old sociological panic.
It was such a striking observation.
It really stuck with me. They wrote, quote, "There has definitely been a step change in Chesterton Radio," unquote. So today we are taking a deep dive into how a massive archive of dead audio files actually became a living cure for modern loneliness.
Which is a fascinating transition to unpack.
Welcome to Under the Hood, coming to you from the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas, Chesterton Radio. And we are inviting you, the listener, to pull up a chair and be the third person in this conversation today. Because what we're exploring goes so far beyond just broadcasting.
Yeah, we're really looking at the architecture of belonging today. And it is crucial to set the parameters right at the start for you guys listening.
Mm-hmm.
We are not analyzing YouTube algorithms here.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
We aren't looking at subscriber counts. And we are certainly not interested in modern audience retention metrics or marketing tactics.
Leave that to the tech channels, right?
Exactly. Those are mechanisms of commerce. What we are investigating today is a cultural and really a philosophical phenomenon. How does a digital collection of classic content evolve into an actual place where people feel they belong?
And to figure that out, we have a really fascinating stack of sources to navigate. We're going to be threading the needle between Robert Putnam's sociological research in his book Bowling Alone, Ray Oldenburg's architectural concept of the third place, the urban design principles of placemaking from the Project for Public Spaces, and then, throwing in the preservation history of the BBC's Saturday Night Theater.
It's quite a mix.
Plus the philosophy of G.K. Chesterton, of course, and even some original literature from the station itself, specifically a story called The Names Inside. But I want to start by drilling right into that listener's specific phrasing. They didn't say the station just got better.
Right, they used very specific terminology.
Yeah, they said there was a step change.
And that phrase is incredibly revealing, especially when you look at its origin. Because in engineering or mathematics, a step change, it's not a gradual slope of improvement.
Like just tweaking things here and there.
Right, exactly. If you look at a graph of a normal business or channel improving over time, you see this gentle horizontal slope upward. You get slightly better graphics, maybe cleaner audio, a more streamlined interface.
Iterative progress.
Yes. But a step change, however, is a sudden vertical jump. It's complete discontinuity from what came before. The line doesn't slope. It literally breaks and reappears on an entirely different level of existence.
It fundamentally alters the state of the thing itself, which, that forces us to look at what Chesterton Radio used to be just to understand what it leaped into, right?
We have to establish the baseline, yeah.
Yeah. So for a very long time, it basically operated in what we could call the era of preservation. And if we look at the source material concerning the old-time radio researchers library and the Internet Archive, the sheer scale of that preservation is just mind-bending.
Oh, the volume is staggering.
We're talking terabytes of data, thousands upon thousands of hours of audio just sitting on servers, complete runs of Suspense, Gunsmoke, Jack Benny, yours truly, Johnny Dollar.
And the magnitude of that effort, it really cannot be overstated, especially when you consider just how incredibly fragile this medium was.
Right, because audio wasn't treated like something to keep forever back then.
No, not at all. The source detailing the history of the BBC's Saturday Night Theater provides a really stark reality check on this. That program was a massive staple of British radio drama, but the majority of the plays from the 1940s were broadcast live.
Oh, wow. So they just went out into the ether.
Exactly. They weren't recorded for posterity, or if they were, the physical magnetic tapes were wiped so they could be reused because tape was expensive.
So it was just a disposable commodity to them.
Yeah, so the earliest surviving audio from that program is a 1945 broadcast of The Corn is Green, which was adapted by T. Roland Hughes. Just archiving these surviving fragments, pulling them back from the brink, is a monumental triumph against the entropy of time.
But a triumph of archiving, no matter how heroic it is, it still just leaves you with an archive.
Right, it's static.
Yeah, an archive is a repository. It holds things. So for years, the station was essentially functioning as a very generous librarian, handing over a pristine digital file and saying, "Here is an old radio play. Enjoy your listening."
It was a one-way street, basically.
Yeah.
A transactional relationship between a server dispensing data and a listener consuming it in a total vacuum.
And I look at the transition this way. If you look at modern algorithmic social media feeds, they are built like superhighways.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. They are designed for speed, for transaction, and relentless forward momentum. You consume the content and you just keep scrolling. You are insulated inside your own little vehicle, completely isolated from the person driving in the lane right next to you.
You're close, but you're not connecting.
Exactly. So preserving these classic radio stories was like building a massive, pristine warehouse just off the side of that superhighway. It's full of the finest ingredients, the best flour, rare spices, aged cheeses. But if you just give someone a bag of flour, they are still going home to eat alone in their own kitchen.
And the transition from the warehouse to the dining table is the exact vertical leap of that step change.
Yeah.
It is the shift from just providing an artifact to hosting a communion around that artifact.
Oh, wait, I have to challenge the physical reality of it.
Okay, lay it on me.
Because we are talking about a digital stream here, a web address. Ray Oldenburg and pretty much every other placemaking sociologist we read relies heavily on physical proximity to define community.
They do, yes.
You cannot literally share a meal over Wi-Fi. You can't make eye contact. And honestly, a troll can invade a digital stream in seconds, hiding behind some cartoon avatar. So how does a digital space police its borders and maintain genuine community without just being, like, the illusion of a dining table?
Well, that is the defining friction of digital sociology right now. And you are totally right that an uncurated digital space devolves into a hostile wasteland almost instantly.
We've all seen the comment sections on YouTube.
Right. It's a mess. But consider the difference between a museum and a living culture. A museum preserves artifacts under glass, right? You're forbidden to touch them. A living culture, however, interacts with its artifacts. It debates them, it integrates them into daily life, and builds entirely new traditions around them.
It's hands-on.
Exactly. The step change at Chesterton Radio was the intentional curation of the digital space to enforce the behavior of a living culture. They realized they could replace physical proximity with temporal and philosophical proximity. The human connection over the shared narrative becomes the table.
Which means the listener transforms from a passive consumer into an active congregant.
Yes, congregant. That's the perfect word.
And that word carries a lot of weight. It suggests a shared purpose, which leads us directly into the sociological crisis that makes a digital gathering place so incredibly vital right now. Robert Putnam laid this out in Bowling Alone, and while most people, I think, are somewhat familiar with his central bowling metaphor, the psychological mechanics underneath his data are what we really need to dig into here.
Because Putnam tracked the severe decline in American social capital, starting from the 1950s onward. And social capital, just to define it, is the fabric of trust and reciprocity. It's the networks of relationships that actually allow a society to function.
The glue that holds us together.
Right. And he documented the complete collapse of traditional civic organizations, the parent-teacher associations, fraternal organizations, local political chapters. The aggregate loss of membership across all these groups was just staggering.
Yeah, and the central metaphor he used was bowling. So the total number of people bowling actually went up, but league bowling plummeted. We know that statistic. But if you dig into the psychology of why the league matters, it's fascinating.
It's all about the structure.
Right, because when you bowl alone or just with a buddy on a Friday night, the focus is entirely on the transaction of the game. You roll the ball, you hang out for an hour, you leave. But when you are in a league, you are forced into this highly inefficient structure. You have to wait your turn.
You have a lot of downtime.
Exactly. You have to sit on a plastic chair next to like a mechanic you wouldn't otherwise ever speak to, or a school teacher from a completely different tax bracket. The magic of social capital doesn't happen during the bowling. It happens in the friction of the waiting. It's the conversations between the frames.
It is the incidental contact. That's where the magic is. And Putnam quantified the causes of this erosion, attributing segments of it to suburban sprawl, people commuting longer, generational shifts. But he pointed a massive spotlight at the expansion of electronic entertainment.
Wait, he actually put a number on it, didn't he?
He did. He blamed it for a full 25% of the decline. He argued that technology was actively individualizing our leisure time, and he even predicted back then that things like virtual reality helmets would only seal us further into our own private silos.
Which is terrifyingly accurate given where tech is going today. So here is the paradox we really have to wrestle with. If Putnam was right that electronic entertainment is the acid dissolving our social fabric, how do we look at the comment section of Chesterton Radio?
Because it defies the model.
It really does. By all conventional metrics, a YouTube comment section or a digital message board is the ultimate manifestation of individualized, detached electronic entertainment. It is usually just people shouting into a digital void to get a reaction.
But we have to view those specific listener comments at Chesterton Radio not as standard engagement metrics, but as active resistance to the isolation Putnam diagnosed.
Yeah.
Because when you read the comments on the little station, they are entirely devoid of that toxic performative irony that plagues the rest of the internet.
They are deeply vulnerable. I was looking at some, and a listener will leave a note saying they fell asleep to a 1952 episode of Escape because the real world just feels too overwhelming. Or they'll share this vivid memory of listening to Fibber McGee and Molly with their grandfather on a cross-country road trip.
Right. They're trying to go viral with a hot take.
No. They are doing exactly what you do between the frames at the bowling alley. They are throwing a line out, hoping someone sitting in a digital plastic chair next to them tugs back and says, "Yeah, I remember that too."
They're seeking what Putnam called bridging and bonding social capital. And because of that, the conversations around these 80-year-old broadcasts have become just as valuable as the broadcasts themselves. I mean, the stories are merely the campfire. The real value is the warmth of the people gathered around it. It satisfies a very deep human hunger to be known and to share in a cultural inheritance.
Which brings us right back to that historical irony I mentioned in the intro. When Everett Carl Ladd pushed back on Putnam's thesis, he pointed to the famous Middletown studies conducted by the sociologists Robert and Helen Lind back in the 1920s.
Oh, this is such a great connection.
The Linds went to Muncie, Indiana to study what they called the typical American town, and they found a community deeply anxious about the death of local connection. And what did the Linds blame? Radio.
Radio.
They warned that people were going to stop sitting on their front porches and instead lock their front doors to listen to centralized broadcasts coming out of New York.
It is a profound cyclical irony. The technology that was accused of destroying the front porch in 1924 is being utilized in 2026 to rebuild it.
But how do you actually rebuild a front porch out of code and audio streams? This is where Ray Oldenburg's framework of the third place comes in, and where we need to look really closely at the architecture of what Chesterton Radio has built.
Right, because Oldenburg argued in his book, The Great Good Place, that healthy communities require three distinct spaces. The first place is the home. The second place is the workplace or the school. And the third place is a neutral, highly accessible setting where community life actually takes root.
So we're talking about pubs, barbershops, public libraries, the local diner on the corner. The source from the University of Missouri Extension highlights Oldenburg's specific criteria for this. A third place must be neutral ground. No one plays host, no one is a guest, everyone enters on equal footing.
It has a low-key atmosphere, a playful spirit.
And most importantly, it relies on regulars. The regulars set the tone and they self-police the environment.
And if we look at the design principles of placemaking from the Project for Public Spaces, they emphasize that building a third place is a highly intentional act. You don't just throw open a room and hope a community forms. You have to design the hub by putting the behavior of the community at the dead center of the architecture.
Right, but again, I'm stuck on this physical versus digital divide because the MU source features a fantastic real-world case study about a woman named Maria in Southwest Missouri.
Oh, I love this example.
It's brilliant. She realized her neighbors only ever wave from their cars as they pull into their garages. Total isolation. So she started what she called a front yard coffee corner. She just put a small table, a thermos of coffee, and 4 chairs in her yard near the sidewalk. Every Saturday at 9 a.m., no agenda, just an open invitation to sit.
And it completely changed the dynamic of her street.
Over time, regulars emerged. The retired mechanic down the block, the night shift nurse, it completely transformed the neighborhood.
Because she lowered the barrier to entry while simultaneously establishing a predictable rhythm.
But Maria had a physical sidewalk. She had physical coffee. If the defining feature of a third place is the human behavior inside it, as the MU source claims, doesn't the digital nature of Chesterton Radio actually make it superior to Maria's yard in a way?
Superior. How so?
Because it completely eradicates geographic and mobility barriers. You don't have to walk down the street. A truck driver in Perth, a nurse on a night shift in London, and a homebound senior in Kansas can all pull up a chair at the exact same moment.
Okay. It certainly broadens the potential scope, yes. But we must acknowledge the inherent fragility of digital spaces. Without physical cues, tone of voice, body language, the sheer vulnerability of physical presence digital spaces tend to lack the friction that breeds empathy.
Because it's too easy to just log off if you get annoyed.
Exactly. And this is where Chesterton Radio executed its true step change. To counter the frictionless void of the internet, they intentionally injected architectural friction back into the experience.
Okay, give me a concrete example of that digital friction.
Linear programming and fixed rhythms.
Yeah.
The MU source emphasizes built-in rhythms, not just one-off events. On platforms like Netflix or Spotify, you have total control. You can binge a show at 3 a.m. on demand. That is frictionless, but it is deeply isolating. Chesterton Radio operates as a linear stream. The lights come on before sunrise. The morning prayer is broadcast at a very specific time. The daily deep dives into literature and philosophy happen on a strict schedule.
So they are forcing the listener to surrender control to the schedule. If you want to experience the morning prayer, you have to show up when it is actually happening.
Exactly.
And the psychological effect of that is knowing that everyone else in the comment section or the chat is experiencing the exact same audio at the exact same second all over the world. It perfectly recreates the shared temporal experience of Maria's Saturday morning coffee hour.
Precisely. That shared temporal reality builds familiarity. And familiarity breeds the regulars that Oldenburg said are the absolute lifeblood of a third place. The station realized it was not merely a media channel broadcasting at an audience, it was a digital living room hosted for a congregation.
Which perfectly sets up the philosophical foundation of the station. Because I think we need to ask, why ground this entire digital project in the ideas of a turn-of-the-century English writer like G.K. Chesterton?
Well, because Chesterton diagnosed the exact spiritual malaise that drives our modern isolation. In his works like Orthodoxy and What's Wrong with the World, he argued that modern sociological and political methods fail because they start by analyzing the disease.
And they focus on the broken parts.
Right. They look at what is broken and try to patch it. But Chesterton believed you must start with the ideal. You have to first define what a healthy, beautiful, thriving human existence looks like, what is fundamentally right, before you can accurately fix what is wrong.
And his ideal was rooted in a radical reclaiming of wonder. He wrote in Orthodoxy that the world does not lack wonders, but rather we lack the habit of seeing them.
We become entirely numb to it all.
We do. We look at a sunset or a massive, beautiful tree, and we feel nothing because we've lost our moral imagination. He fought for a romantic view of the world where we practice intense gratitude for the ordinary.
Now think about how this applies to the medium of classic radio itself. Modern entertainment just spoon-feeds the audience.
With screens everywhere.
Exactly. A massive CGI explosion in a movie requires absolutely no imagination from the viewer. You just sit back and absorb the sensory overload. Classic radio, however, is an exercise in active co-creation. It demands a partnership between the creator and the listener.
It is the ultimate exercise in moral imagination, because an audio engineer in a 1940s studio slowly opens a squeaky wooden door, and because they respect the intelligence of the audience, the listener's brain takes that single sound effect and constructs a towering, damp, haunted castle in their mind. The listener is doing half the work.
It respects the audience's capacity for wonder. And this philosophical baseline, this reverence for the ordinary and the unseen, is brilliantly illustrated in the original literature produced by the station itself. The source provides a chapter from their original novel, The Brennans, specifically Book 1, Chapter 3, titled The Names Inside.
Let's pull this story apart because it operates as a perfect microcosm for the entire ethos of the station. We have the Brennan family, Patrick, Margaret, Claire, Grace, Tommy, and little Nora. And they are volunteering to sort books for a summer library sale in Atchison.
Right, a very mundane setting.
Very mundane. But right from the beginning, we see Chesterton's philosophy of wonder applied to the mundane. Nora, the youngest, is carrying around a stick she has named Moses. She insists on bringing it to the library because, as she reasons, Moses knows about tablets, and tablets were the earliest form of books.
It's a deeply charming moment, but structurally it's actually quite profound. When her Aunt Claire tells her that sticks don't require views from the car window, Nora defends the stick, insisting that Moses crossed the desert and has earned some comfort.
I love that.
She is investing a totally worthless piece of wood with historical gravity and reverence. She refuses to see it as just a stick.
She is practicing the exact moral imagination that Chesterton says we are all starving for. But the real emotional core of the chapter happens when they start sorting a box of books donated from the estate of the Whitcomb family. Tommy is pulling out all these forgotten artifacts tucked inside the pages, a grocery receipt, a pressed fern, a funeral holy card. And then Grace finds this small, dark prayer book.
Right, it's very worn down.
Yeah, it has rounded corners, a frayed ribbon marker, and the gold lettering on the cover is almost completely rubbed away.
From a purely commercial standpoint, it is garbage. I mean, the librarian, Mrs. Bell, even notes that it would likely just be tossed in the 10-cent bin. But Grace opens it and finds names written inside.
Names in different inks, written by different hands across generations. The first is Eleanor Whitcomb, given as a Christmas gift from her mother in 1938. And tucked deep inside the pages is a folded piece of private paper. Now here is where the story reveals its moral compass. Tommy, operating on very practical logic, wants to open the paper immediately to see if there is an address so they can mail it back.
Makes sense on the surface. But Claire stops him. She argues a point of deep ethical stewardship. She tells him they do not yet know if that paper was meant to be found by them or if it was intentionally left behind by the owner.
They have to respect it.
They must respect the privacy and the dignity of the artifact. They cannot just tear into it for their own curiosity.
And little Nora, clutching her stick, asks a question that just stops the room. She asks, whose book is it? When they try to explain that the library currently owns it, she pushes back. She says, but whose is it really? It belongs to the names. She even asks if names get lonely when nobody says them out loud anymore.
That line is just, wow.
Right. Ultimately, they decide not to throw the book into the 10-cent bin. They lock it in a cabinet to try and find the remaining family. They don't know if they will succeed, but they choose to honor the names.
If you take that story and overlay it onto the daily operations of Chesterton Radio, the parallel is exact. Finding an old, worn prayer book in a donation box is an incredibly ordinary event. It happens thousands of times a day at thrift stores. Most people just toss it in the miscellaneous pile without a second thought. But the Brennans treat it as a sacred duty because they recognize the human weight attached to it.
Look at what the audio restorers at the station do. They find a digital file of a 1948 CBS Radio Mystery Theater episode. The audio is crackling, it's hissing, half the voice actors are completely uncredited. From a modern commercial standpoint, it's a 10-cent file.
Toss it in the bin.
Throw it in the archive and forget about it. But the restorers spend hours scrubbing the audio track, researching the forgotten names of the character actors, designing custom artwork just for the broadcast.
They're doing exactly what Claire and Grace did. They're refusing to let the names get lonely. Wonder, gratitude, and hospitality, they're not abstract concepts. They are the mortar that holds enduring communities together. By treating a forgotten radio script or a faded prayer book with profound reverence, the station actively trains the listener's moral imagination.
It changes how you see things.
It teaches the listener to look at their own life, their own seemingly mundane neighborhood, and recognize the hidden dignity residing there.
Which demands a very specific mindset from the people running the station. You cannot sustain a project that operates on wonder and gratitude if you are constantly subjugating those values to the demands of algorithms and commerce.
No, the two are incompatible.
This brings us to the builder's mindset.
The source text, keeping the little station on Commercial Street on the air, addresses this tension directly. The station made a conscious structural decision to rely on listener support and founding sponsors rather than standard algorithmic advertising.
And let's be honest about why that is so necessary. Think about the atmosphere we just described. I want you to imagine tuning into the digital stream. You've just finished participating in the morning prayer. You've listened to the Psalms, perhaps a quiet, reflective reading on the gospel. The community chat is peaceful. There is a moment of profound, orienting silence.
A sacred pause.
And then suddenly, bam! A screaming, high-decibel commercial for a discount mattress warehouse blasts through your speakers, followed by an ad for some chaotic mobile game.
It would completely shatter the psychological safety of the third place.
It's violently jarring. The source makes it clear that they aren't anti-commerce. I mean, Commercial Street is literally named for trade. Honest, localized trade is how communities survive, but there's a hierarchy of values. In a space dedicated to reverence and connection, commerce must remain a polite guest, not the domineering host.
The author of the source text uses a brilliant historical metaphor to explain this ethos. They compare the audio editors, writers, and engineers of the station to medieval cathedral builders. When medieval stonemasons built the great cathedrals of Europe, they would often carve incredibly intricate, beautiful figures high up in the dark corners of the vaulted roofs.
Places where it was physically impossible for anyone standing on the floor of the cathedral to ever actually see them.
Exactly. From a modern, efficiency-obsessed viewpoint, that is a complete waste of time and resources. Why carve a masterpiece in the dark? But the craftsman did it because the excellence of the work was offered to God, not to an audience. The work itself was a form of stewardship.
And that is the absolute antithesis of the YouTube algorithm, which dictates that you must do the most outrageous thing possible in the first 3 seconds just to trap the viewer's attention. The cathedral builder mindset explains the unseen hours spent perfectly balancing the EQ on a 70-year-old broadcast of The Whistler. The average listener might not consciously notice the absence of background hiss, but the excellence is built into the architecture of the space regardless.
Furthermore, true stewardship is not merely preservation. The source makes a really vital distinction here. Tradition does not mean freezing the past in amber. That is what a museum does. Living tradition means receiving an inheritance from your ancestors, honoring it, and then building an addition onto the house for your descendants.
This is why the station isn't content just playing Dimension X or Lux Radio Theater on a loop. They are actively creating new art. They are producing original Father Brown mysteries. They are writing original literature like the Brennans. They are taking the moral imagination and the craftsmanship of the golden age of radio and deploying it to tell new stories for the modern world. They are proving that the medium isn't dead, it was just dormant.
And all of this architectural intent, this philosophy of wonder, and this builder's mindset, it all culminates in the station's central catchphrase, which is, "The open door is always on."
When you really look at the mechanics of that catchphrase, it's a total paradox.
It really is.
The author of the source points this out. A door is either open or closed. A radio is either on or off. You do not leave a door on, and you cannot turn a radio open.
It is a linguistic collision of two different realities. But as a metaphor, it perfectly synthesizes the step change we've been talking about. It is a broadcast, a radio signal that is on, transmitting data across the world. But it is also a physical gathering place, a third place whose door is always open.
Because a media channel demands your attention. It tracks your watch time, sells your data, and tries to keep you endlessly scrolling. A gathering place invites your presence. It says, come in, sit down. You are welcome here whether you stay for 3 minutes or 3 hours.
It fundamentally shifts the metric of success. A broadcaster asks, how many people consume this content? A third place asks, how many people felt known, respected, and sustained by being here?
When we zoom out and look at the totality of what we've discussed today, the significance of the little station on Commercial Street becomes incredibly clear. It is not a nostalgic retreat into the past. It is an active, living refuge in the present. It's a space where people from across the globe gather to share in wonder and thoughtful conversation and in genuine friendship, proving that Robert Putnam's bowling alleys aren't gone, they've just relocated.
But we must acknowledge that this ecosystem, the daily anchor of morning prayer, the meticulous restoration of lost voices, the creation of new literature, it does not sustain itself by magic. The cathedral requires builders.
That's very true.
It exists solely because of the profound generosity of the listeners. The people who choose to act as founding sponsors, who sponsor a week of programming in memory of a loved one, who actively share the station with a friend who needs it. They are the ones keeping the lights on.
To you, the listener, we extend the warmest possible invitation. If you are hungry for that conversation between the bowling frames, if you are tired of the isolating superhighways of modern media and want a place where ordinary things are treated with extraordinary reverence, step through the open door. Become a regular at the station, add your voice to the comments, share your memories, and pull up a chair at the table.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've spent this time exploring how shared stories, intentional rhythms, and a reverence for wonder can transform a digital frequency into a life-giving community. But Chesterton firmly believed that the most important revolutions happen locally. Every physical home has its own quiet stories waiting to be told.
Right in your own backyard.
Exactly. So, if an imaginary station in Atchison, Kansas can use old audio files to cure a piece of the modern world's isolation, what is the step change waiting to happen in your own physical living room? Or on your own physical street? What forgotten story is waiting for you to simply pull up a chair, pour a cup of coffee, and ask your neighbor, what do you make of this?
Sometimes a step change isn't a massive global shift. Sometimes it's just looking at the isolation of modern life, deciding you've had enough, and starting a completely different level of conversation. Until next time.